welcome to Takeout Tuesday. We continue a little series we began a while back, moving forward into your future without fear, or at least with not as much fear, because we are definitely living in fearful times. And the key, of course, is faith in God, and really beyond that, the fear of God. You remember the story back in Mark chapter 4, which Jesus was crossing over the Galilean Sea with his disciples. The storm blew up. And of course, when he arose at their request, calmed the storm, he asked them in verse 40 of Mark chapter 4, "Why are you so fearful?" And that's a great question to ask ourselves. We have to check our fear. We have to confront ourselves. Why are we feeling the anxiety and the apprehension, the fears about our future? Certainly we can go, well, duh, we're living in the midst of very unprecedented times with this COVID-19 thing still looming over us. And although we're beginning to get little sparkles of light at the end of the tunnel, there's still a lot of apprehension of exactly how, where, and when this is going to play out. But then in verse 41 of Mark chapter 4, it says, "And they feared exceedingly." Now, this caught my attention some time ago, how they were in fear of the storm. Jesus calms the storm. Then all of a sudden, they've got a fear now in them that exceeds the fear of the storm. And I believe in the context that they now had a greater fear of the greater one present with them, Jesus himself, the Lord of the seas and the storms. And they marveled that even the wind and the sea obeyed him. And of course, the way we check fear in our life is to have a greater fear of God, knowing that he is greater than anything we will ever face or go through. Well, kind of a parallel story to this, moving back to the Old Testament in Joshua chapter 5. We left off here last week. The children of Israel had finally crossed the Jordan River. They'd gotten to the other side, and of course, God left no doubt. He didn't give them a plan how to devise some flotation devices or go to Bass Pro Shop and load up on boats, what have you. He actually stopped the flow of the water so they could pass over on dry land, which no human could ever accomplish in the sense of the way God did. Remember, that was at the floodplain stages of that time of the year, and the river was out of its banks and a roaring mess there, and God got them through on dry land. Now, Joshua had lots of experience under his belt. He had been with this group of Israelites, God's people, from their exodus out of Egypt, and now here they are finally in the promised land. They've crossed over, and now he has gone from a wonderful follower of God and Moses to the leader of the people of Israel. And so as he gets to the other side, he moves over to the other side, and what would be looked at in the human realm of things, a lot of confidence, his experience, his position, the testimonies of the great things God had done. And yet in his humanity and our humanity, there's always the next adventure, the next challenge, the next conflict, the next circumstance that will test our human limitations and require us to have faith in God's ability to get us through it. It kind of reminds me of the Farmers Insurance commercial on TV. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And Joshua certainly knew a thing or two because he had seen a thing or two. But, life doesn't just repeat the same thing all the time. So we get to see new things every once in a while. We never get to that place that it's like, okay, seen this, been there, done that. There's times like what we're going through now that's unprecedented in our lifetime. And as a result, it requires a great deal of faith in God and a fear of God who is greater than whatever we are facing. Now, they just crossed the river, and here they are now really almost in the shadows of the great walls of Jericho. I was doing a little background research, and they were like, really, it was double walled from what I understand. First wall was anywhere from 12 to 15 feet high. Then there was a little bit of an incline, and then there was what they call a redoubt or whatever, a second wall that I'm not sure if it's like another 28 foot higher or if it's another 15 or so foot higher, but it ends up about 28 feet then. And so, I mean, it's not just one wall, it's two. It's not a knee wall, it is a high wall. And on those walls, because at the base of the walls, they were about 30 feet wide. And so that's where the armies would amass, and they'd stand there and be able to fire down upon the approaching soldiers that were coming against them. And so this was just, in one sense, a military impossibility. I mean, I'm sure he's sitting there trying to come up with a strategy. How's this going to happen? Or he may, let's give him credit, be seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, here we are with another impossible thing in front of us. Can you get us through it? How are you going to get us through it? Well, let's read these 3 verses and we'll cap it pretty quickly today. Joshua 5:13. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. Now, it's important to recognize, certainly you and I can't help but be focused right now on what is next in relationship and in the context of this the coronavirus thing. You know, they're beginning to release some restrictions and let us out, but you're hearing rumors that this thing in some form or measure could go on for another year. And that just, you know, that grates on us, that grinds away at our soul and our resolve. And so here is Joshua, and he's studying the wall. Then all of a sudden his attention is captured by a solitary figure. And so much so because he's got a drawn sword. That would get my attention too. That'd be like today, you're looking at something and all of a sudden you realize there's a guy standing over next to you with a gun drawn. You know, it's going to get your attention. So he got Joshua's attention. And so as he recognizes this figure, he asked the redundant question, are you for us or for our adversaries? In other words, are you on our side or on their side? Great question. But notice the way this solitary figure answered him. He said in verse 14, no, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. In other words, is my old favorite, Adrian Rogers, used to preach. The answer here basically was, I didn't come to take sides. I came to take over. And that's God in our lives. God doesn't come to just pick a side. God comes to take over. And when it comes to it, whether it's me and my circumstance, me and my enemy, whatever it is, God is the commander over all of us. And as a result, we recognize who's really in charge. We've got to ask ourselves, who's in charge of our future as we move forward? Can we plot, plan, work our way through this thing through our human ingenuity? Certainly the world that doesn't know God is working overtime to figure out how to take advantage of a situation like this, that's going to be doomed for some and just a dynamic thing for others. But for us who know the Lord, our future is in His hands. He is our commander. He is in charge. And so he says, and this is what they call a Christophany. And there are a number of these in the Old Testament in which they're called pre-incarnate appearances of Jesus Christ. And He'll come in under the name of the angel of the Lord, the commander of the Lord's army, the commander of the host. These are pre-incarnate appearances of Jesus Christ. So here's Joshua seeing Christ manifest to him and reminding Joshua, even though humanly you've been delegated the power and the authority to lead this army and this nation, ultimately, directly, I'm in charge. I am the commander. In other words, you take your commands from me as you turn around and give the commands to those who are following both of us. Me, then you. And so as we look at this, it's not an either or, it's I am in control. He is the commander of the Lord's army. I like what Abraham Lincoln said back in the Civil War when asked about whose side God was on, whether the Union or the Confederacy. And he says, "My concern is not whether God is on our side." He said, "My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right." So we end right here in verse 15 and verse 14. He says, "And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshiped and said to him, 'What does my Lord say to his servant?' Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, 'Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy.' And Joshua did so." Two things we've always got to remind ourselves of as we move forward, even in the uncertain, fearful future, is remind ourselves who God is and what God can do in and through our lives. So I hope this will be a reminder to you for the rest of the week, the rest of the month, the rest of the year, as we move into our future confident in the power of God, who He is, and what He can do. God bless you. Have a great week.